Welcome to Explosive Enterprises, and it's time for another Q&A. First, a big thank you to everyone who watches our channel, and in particular to our Patreon supporters who help make this possible. Without further ado, let's get right into it. What's a replica y'all think is dogpiled unfairly? What's a gun you've had teething issues with, but actually turned out to be good in the long run? I think rather than answer that as a specific model, I want to talk more about brands. And I'm going to say we. With Wiis, we often see designs that are capable of performing well, but are let down by the use of a lot of pot metal. And while you can replace with steel parts or with OEM replacements, the issue is usually a cost-benefit assessment. So there are a lot of designs they have where they can be made to work just fine, but by the time you put enough money into them to do that, you might as well have gone for something better to begin with. The exceptions would be some of the things they do that are a little bit unique, like we've shown the P90 on this channel a little bit, hope to do a video on that in the future. They have some very interesting niche guns that aren't done by anyone else, and with a lot of those you can make them perform reasonably well as long as you're willing to sink enough time and money into them. In my case in particular, I've used this is a Wii Glock 34 Gen 5, which is internally based on the Tokyo Marui Gen 3 G17 system. And because it is a direct clone, I've been able to use a lot of the aftermarket that was intended for the TMs. So for example, this is a prime slide and the original Wii frame, but then upgraded hop components as well, a bomber roller bearing. And with all those modifications, it performs fairly well, above 50 Fahrenheit, 10 Celsius or so. Doesn't perform so well in the cold, doesn't have as much recoil as newer designs. I would say it's functionally obsolete, and hope to show a little bit more in the near future about what's going to be replacing it. But it is a design that works perfectly well, and it's been cost effective, and it's been a dependable sidearm for a number of years. So thinking of the big GBB manufacturers, KWA, KSC, TM, VFC, Wii, GHK, etc., what would be the one piece of advice you would give them if there was a hypothetical opportunity to do so? Consider foreign markets. I mean, this is a pie-in-the-sky kind of dream because most of them are getting their money from their domestic markets, but TM doesn't design for over 0.28 gram BBs or over 1 joule in power. They usually don't design for propane pressures either. And parts are unavailable because as far as they're concerned, if you're outside of Japan, you don't exist. Taiwanese manufacturers don't design for below room temperature or for BB weights below 0.3s. And often parts are threadlocked because the expectation is that if something goes wrong, you'll take it to the local service center and they'll fix it for you. If manufacturers were to design more for 0.28s to 0.36s and design for the 90 to 120 psi that we see with propane at 50 to 70 Fahrenheit or 10 to 20 Celsius, I think we'd have a lot fewer problems. I think we'd have guns that work better out of the box and don't need replacement buckings or replacement springs in order to handle the pressures or cold weather. I don't think that's going to happen, but hey, I can wish. Do you think there will be a next big thing or leap in technology with gas blowbacks or airsoft as a whole? What do you think it might be? Two things jump to mind. First is there's a company called MaxTac that has produced regulated CO2 magazines. They sent us some samples. We haven't done a video on it because they didn't quite work as advertised. Need to figure out exactly why, but in theory, what you could do is fill a magazine with CO2 at 800 psi, at room temperature, and then have a built-in regulator that steps it down to the 100 to 120 psi that the gun expects. So what you're getting in that case is effectively immunity to cooldown because it's regulating the same way like an HPA regulator works, giving you consistent power and much higher power density than if you were just using propane, but without having, again, like the cooldown issues that you get with just unregulated CO2. So in theory, that's kind of HPA-like performance without needing an external HPA line. The problem that we ran into is that when we tested the MaxTac mags, they didn't actually work that way. We did still have some cooldown. We did still see poor performance in cold weather. It could have to do with the mechanical design of the regulator. Just haven't had the time or inclination to go through it yet. But we intend to. The other possibility that seems interesting is non-gas blowback. For example, the GBLS DAS or the TM eVolt. I had the opportunity to shoot a DAS a couple of years ago, and it was a very interesting experience because it did have a decent amount of recoil. Not a lot, but it was more than like those extremely lame electronic blowback AEGs where it's just an AEG. There's nothing interesting about it. But it was very cool to get something a little more GBB-like with a purely electric mechanism. And the things I didn't like about it were that it was extremely limited on parts compatibility, and it had the worst trigger I have ever felt on a rifle. It was extremely heavy, it was spongy, it really sucked a lot of the fun out of the experience. Probably something that could be improved. I don't know, maybe they've had generational changes. TM is now throwing their hat in the ring with the eVolt system. Seems very interesting. From what I've heard, it unsurprisingly doesn't work very well above about 1 joule, but worth looking into. I've always seen the gases that we use as propellant as kind of like a best of the bad options. They're a compromise, and there's a lot to be said for battery power, offering stable output, not having to worry about temperature, not having to worry about cooldown. It's just a matter of making it work reliably. What do you guys miss from the past or from pre-COVID airsoft, e.g. community, replicas, gear, innovations, etc.? Someone who started playing recently, I'm curious to see what has changed, was improved, or worsened. The thing that I think has gotten worse is communication of information. I miss forums. I miss having central repositories of information where you could go and type up everything that you've learned and other people could comment on it, and it'd be there in years that some random person could stumble upon and learn from you. We also didn't used to have as much drama with like toxic milsim, toxic speedsoft, ghillie snipers going for headshots, that kind of thing. It was more of a kind of enthusiast hobby, and it's just everyone let's just show up and shoot each other in the woods and have fun. Having said all that, I really do think the sport is in the best place that it ever has been, because it's more popular than ever, and that makes it easier to find a group that caters to what you want to do. You want to play Speedsoft? You can find Speedsoft fields. You want to do Milsim? You can find some amazing Milsim events. More than that, the equipment is so much better. You get a lot more bang for your buck nowadays. A $300 GBBR or AEG for that matter nowadays does what a $1,500 Inokatsu or Sistema did 20 years ago. It's just no contest in terms of quality. The first major video that we did on this channel was a GHK AUG. We're pretty positive about it, and as I think back on that, being a mostly pot metal replica with some hop issues and some fragility problems and a decent amount of maintenance needed, I think if we were to review it nowadays, we'd be a lot less positive. And that's just like a 5-year difference, let alone 10, 15, 20. So the industry is continuing to improve. I think the game is continuing to improve. We hear the, oh, airsoft is dying, doomsaying every couple of years. I don't think it's true. For those who still want a gas blowback AR derivative, what would your advice be for stateside players amidst the import seizure drama? Okay, so let's explain a little bit about exactly what's going on. ATF is seizing at the border, specifically VFC, GHK, and Vipertech ARs and AR adjacents like the MCX. They are not seizing VFC or GHK AKs or FALs or any other gun platform, and they are not seizing TM, Double Eagle, or CYMA ARs. It's specifically the combination of realistic brands and ARs. And the reason for that is it's essentially an artifact of how the US regulates ARs. With most guns, the part that's legally considered the receiver, which is the controlled and serialized component, is a pressure-bearing part. It's the part that holds the bolt carrier, that holds the barrel on something like an AK or an FAL. It's very obvious. With the AR, the lower is what's considered the serialized component, and that is not a pressure-bearing part, and that's why people are able to make lowers out of 3D prints, out of wood, out of all sorts of things, because it's very easy to make a lower that can function with a real upper. And that makes the ATF very wary about toys and models and anything else that in theory could be modified with enough work to function with a real upper. Whereas with something like an AK or an FAL, there's no way you're going to take like a toy receiver and make it stand up to pressure, add a locking shoulder, add a barrel. It's never going to happen without more work than it would take to make one from scratch. So either ATF or CBP apparently has decided that VFC and GHK lowers are close enough to the real thing that it doesn't require as much modification as they would like in order to make it function with a real upper, and so they are not permitting import. And you might say, oh, well, in the US, can't you have a real lower? Yes, but you cannot import one that doesn't have a serial number, that doesn't go with the right paperwork, and you certainly cannot import a real select fire lower. This has happened before. There was an airsoft shop raided by ATF in the 2000s over a shipment of gas blowback ARs of all things. It was a whole big deal, it was on the news, and it ultimately didn't amount to anything, and people are still able to import gas guns. So this could all blow over in a few months. This could be a new policy change that's going to be permanent. We just don't know yet. In the meantime, if you do want an AR, you could still get an MWS or TM, Double Eagle, CYMA, whatever. And you can also get anything VFC or GHK that is not an AR. Like, you could still get all those AKs and FALs and other things. So if you do want AR, we recommend the TM MWS. The DE clone that we reviewed on this channel is still solid. I will give a hot take, which is that a lot of the real-world advantages of ARs make them kind of considered the default choice don't apply to airsoft. In real life, a decent AR costs half what an exotic European rifle does. That is not the case in airsoft. In real life, if you buy an AR, you have a giant ecosystem of parts that are compatible across all manufacturers. That is absolutely not the case in airsoft, and whether you choose VFC or TM or even like CYMA is in theory an MWS, but it's like not really. These silo you into very specific parts ecosystems, and you don't get that big advantage of cross-compatibility. The advantages of the AR's gas system and recoil characteristics don't apply, so doesn't matter. Caliber doesn't matter. Fundamentally, there are some non-AR replicas on the market right now that perform better and need less work out of the box than their AR counterparts. The VFC FAL OSW that we reviewed on this channel runs circles around the ARs in terms of performance, shooting feel, overall characteristics, and it has a very modern feeling manual of arms. I think fundamentally it is much easier to learn a slightly different gun than it is to overcome technical limitations of the platform that you've decided on. Now, to be clear, I'm not trying to evangelize against ARs or anything. If you want an AR because you want an AR specifically, by all means go for it. Get the DE or the TM. You'll have a great time. Those are great guns. But there's this perception that you should start with an AR, that an AR is the default, that it's the thing that you should get because you're going to put yourself at a disadvantage by buying something else. That is not true. That is not correct. If you're not sold on an AR, consider something else. And that applies even if this current import seizure drama resolves. General updates on replicas you've done a single review on. That's not a question, but okay. The DEN4, some of the SMGs and the like. The M249 is a big one. We never found a solution for the hop-up that works for everyone reliably. The standoff mod in our original video and the bucking modification in the follow-up, those both work, but they can wear out over time, and one solution may work better than another for a given gun, given BB weight, given power level. It's very unpredictable, and I really don't like giving recommendations that amount to here's a couple things that might work, now go spend a bunch of time and money to figure out what's actually going to work best for you. The N4 has been about the same. That's just a fun gun. The owner, Foolish, he hasn't messed with it. The MP5 now has, the VFC MP5 now has a more normal rocket valve design available, and they've shortened the output valve, so no longer has that issue of accidentally triggering in a pouch. So that's gotten a little bit more reasonable. Might revisit that at some point, but the HK53 is a better value for money in every way, and hope to be doing a video on that. The Maruyama MP9 has solutions for the rotor, courtesy of Guillotine Airsoft. There's also a winter spring spec, which you can get from AliExpress. We'll put the specs in the description. That has been working very well. And I know lastly that Time Bomb has had some firing pin issues with that GL06 that he reviewed, so there might be some more follow-up coming on that. Do you have any plans on covering the CYMA CGS? Yeah, we're interested. Like I mentioned earlier, the thing that's always made us a little wary of the CGS is that it's different enough from the MWS that things don't swap over directly. The big thing is that they changed the bolt catch. So instead of using the Z plate system, it's a more traditional or realistic kind of like Western Arms style lifting bolt catch design. And that means you can't swap the bolt carrier for a TM1 unless you also swap the entire trigger group, and at that point you've essentially gutted the gun. Now that wouldn't necessarily be a deal breaker if they all worked great out of the box, but we've had to troubleshoot some locally that have had a lot of problems relating to tolerancing. Now we're told that that was a Gen 1 issue and that the newer generations have fixed it. Very interested in seeing if that pans out because CYMA has a really extensive retro line that I'm quite interested in, especially with the VFCs now being essentially unavailable. But also they have a pretty extensive range of first-party aftermarket parts, which really interests me for the ability to tune and customize, and even if the materials are not great out of the box, maybe swap out some of the parts and build something really cool. I don't know, and I don't know if or when we'll get to it, but definitely something interested in. Comms. What varieties of radio headsets and PTTs does your team run? We have Baofangs for radios, just because they're cheap. Some of us use Comtacs for headsets, for both EarPro and comms. EarPro is very good to have when people are using blank fire or anything on the field, of course. Some of the guys just use knockoff comms-only headsets. My take, I don't know if this is a hot take or not, is that I find that comms are not as useful as I wish they were, just because in more casual games, someone is hot micing all day, or they're making useless callouts, like, there's a guy behind the tree. Cool, thanks. For the bigger milsims, usually only the squad leader needs comms so that he can be integrated into the platoon net, and then it's usually just hand signals or verbal communication for the rest of the squad. It'd be cool if we all had radios and could do some sick fire team coordination, but we just haven't been able to practically make it work just with the limited channels that are available. Your mileage may vary. I guess all this to say that I'm not an expert on comms and you probably shouldn't listen to me. What are some more places to shop for practical gear? Like apparel, I find surplus stores that house nice pieces, but I figured you guys would have at least a top 3 places you shop for your gear. I find most online surplus stores super expensive for what you end up buying. Yeah, so surplus is a good choice. There's an inverse relationship between visibility and price. If you want to find deals, you have to hunt Etsy, you have to hunt eBay, you got to look at local shops. You can find stuff on sites like Grailed, that like camo being sold as fashion accessories, and sometimes it'll be ridiculous, like M81 BDUs for $200 or whatever, and sometimes it's stuff that they don't realize what they have is extremely valuable, and it's just being sold as like something generic military. So you really got to do your homework, and ultimately you're either going to pay in money or you're going to pay in time. But yeah, so if there's something in particular you're looking for, check Etsy, check eBay, look around in like tactical gear swap communities. That's really the best you're going to get. Okay, how do you deal with burnout from the hobby? That is a very good question. I've dealt with this myself. I actually have personally another YouTube channel, Kaka Painting, where I did a lot of miniatures painting tutorials. And this was something where I started feeling obligated to keep putting out content, even when I felt that I was running out of stuff to talk about. And it killed the fun of painting for me, and I just stopped doing it for a couple of years. So the takeaway should be, don't keep playing airsoft if you're not having fun playing airsoft. And I know that sounds really obvious, but I think a lot of us get into this situation where we feel like we put so much investment into it that we just have to keep going to get some return on that investment. And I mean, this is something that we're conditioned to every day from predatory schemes. Sign in for the daily login bonus, keep your 20-day streak going, buy 10 and get your 11th free. Your subscribers haven't heard from you in a while. I hate this stuff so much. It infests every corner of the internet and every part of daily life, and it turns things that should be fun, that should be relaxing, into a chore, essentially. Now, airsoft isn't quite that overtly predatory, but a lot of people feel obligated to use their gear or go to games because all their friends are. And so I can tell you from experience that the easiest way to burn out on a hobby is to turn it into a job or a chore and keep doing it even when it isn't being fun. So if you aren't having fun with airsoft, just stop and go do something else for a while, and then come back when you feel like, hey, I actually want to give airsoft another try. And if that never happens, then that's fine. You're done with the hobby. Move on with your life. It's okay to just try a hobby for a while and even get really invested in it and ultimately decide it's not something you want to do for the rest of your life. That's fine. We all change. We all grow. Life's too short to force yourself to do things you aren't having fun with. And if that sounds like a downer ending to this Q&A, I want to say no, it isn't. Because we keep making these videos because we enjoy this. We enjoy bringing content to you guys. We love seeing improvements to the hobby on the basis of our work. And we really appreciate the enormous amount of support that you guys have given us over the years. So we've got plenty more content in the works, and see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.